My name is Rowan. When my mother died, my father did not scream or break or collapse in front of anyone. He simply became smaller. As if part of him had quietly folded inward and never unfolded again. The house they had shared for most of their lives stood exactly as she had left it. Her mug still on the counter. Her cardigan hanging behind the door. The clock still ticking, marking time she would never step into again. When I visited, I felt like I was walking through a memory that refused to let go of the present. One afternoon, as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table where she used to read the newspaper aloud, he said, "I don't feel alive here anymore." That sentence followed me home, echoed in my head at night, pressed against my chest until I could no longer ignore it. I told him to come live with us because I believed love could fix what grief had broken. At that time, I believed my life was stable. Safe. Finished in all the ways that mattered. My husband Julian and I had been together for over a decade. We met young, before we knew who we were. We grew into adults side by side, building habits and rituals that made life feel dependable. Our house was modest but intentional. We chose everything together. The wood floors we sanded ourselves. The paint colors we argued over for weeks. The small backyard where we planned to grow old without even realizing it. Mornings meant quiet coffee and shared glances. Evenings meant comfort and sameness. I trusted that life completely. I trusted him completely. When I asked Julian if my father could move in, he didn't pause. He didn't ask how long or under what conditions. He smiled, wrapped his arms around me, and said, he shouldn't be alone. I remember pressing my face into his chest and thinking I was safe. I didn't know that safety can be an illusion built slowly enough that you don't notice the cracks until everything gives way at once. My father, Alistair, arrived with one suitcase and tired eyes. The first few weeks felt like something healing. He began cooking again, the way he used to when I was a child. Meals that took time. Meals that filled the house with warmth and memory. Julian praised everything with a sincerity that made my father stand taller. They sat at the table long after dinner, talking quietly, sharing stories I had never heard before. I watched from the doorway and felt relief instead of fear. I told myself this was what family was supposed to look like. They found common ground effortlessly. Music. Old films. Long conversations about life and loss and meaning. Julian listened to my father in a way I hadn't seen him listen to anyone in years. I didn't feel threatened. I felt grateful. I believed we were saving him. The change began invisibly. Julian started waking earlier. He said he liked the mornings now. When I came downstairs, coffee was already brewed, conversation already deep. They stopped talking when I entered, smiled, and continued as if nothing had happened. I laughed it off. I told myself grief bonds people. I told myself not to be suspicious of kindness. Then came the evenings. Alistair liked twilight. He liked the way the light softened the world before it disappeared. Julian began joining him for walks. You work too hard, he'd tell me. Rest. It sounded loving. It sounded thoughtful. They'd return an hour later, sometimes longer, faces flushed, voices warm. I'd be sitting alone in the quiet house, surrounded by furniture that suddenly felt too still, too patient. One night, I asked to join them. The energy shifted immediately. Julian looked surprised. Alistair hesitated. The walk was unbearable. Silence where there had once been laughter. Space where there had once been ease. I walked beside Julian while my father walked ahead, and I felt something invisible but solid form between us. I never asked again. The house stopped feeling like mine. Furniture moved without discussion. Decorations changed. Alistair began making decisions as if the space belonged to him. Julian agreed with everything. When I spoke, my voice felt thinner than I remembered. At dinner, I barely spoke at all. When Julian noticed, Alistair answered for me. "She's tired." Julian nodded. "She works too much." And just like that, I disappeared a little more. My birthday arrived quietly. Julian followed tradition. Breakfast. A gift. A smile. But his attention drifted. That evening, after dinner, he handed Alistair a box. Inside was a carefully chosen gift. Expensive. Thoughtful. The kind of thing that meant something. More meaning than the gift he gave me. I watched the way Julian looked at my father and felt something heavy settle in my chest. That night, I asked him about it. He grew defensive. Irritated. Accused me of imagining problems. I apologized without knowing why. I went to bed feeling smaller than I had in years. Sleep abandoned me. I woke in the night to an empty bed more times than I could count. I wandered the house barefoot, listening. Sometimes I heard voices. Low. Careful. Once, laughter that didn't belong to grief. When Julian returned to bed, he smelled unfamiliar. Not bad. Just not mine. I confronted my father one afternoon in the garden. He reacted with shock, with pain, with anger. He cried and accused me of cruelty. Of seeing betrayal where there was only comfort. I believed him because I wanted to believe my own blood would never hurt me like that. When he hugged me, I smelled the same scent I had noticed on Julian before. Something inside me went cold. After that, they became careful. Too careful. The warmth between Julian and me vanished completely. We spoke in logistics. In surface-level words. Alistair filled every silence. I faded further. The proof came when I stopped looking. I was organizing Julian's desk one afternoon when I found the envelope hidden beneath old papers. Inside was a letter written in a version of his handwriting I barely recognized. Softer. More intimate. He wrote about loss. About finding understanding where he least expected it. About grief opening doors he hadn't known existed. He wrote about me kindly, distantly, like someone remembered rather than loved. He wrote that what he felt now scared him, but he couldn't deny it. I sat on the floor and read it until the words stopped making sense. When they came home, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I asked them to sit. I placed the letter between them. The silence was unbearable. The clock on the wall marked the end of everything. I asked one question. How long have you been lying to me? Julian couldn't answer. Alistair cried. Apologies filled the room, heavy and useless. I told them to leave. That night. They packed quietly. Alistair tried to touch my arm. I stepped back. Julian lingered at the door and said my name like it still belonged to him. I closed the door before he could say more. The silence afterward nearly destroyed me. I unraveled completely. Days blurred. Pain lived in my chest like something physical. I thought grief would swallow me whole. But it didn't. Slowly, I reclaimed the house. Changed it. Made it mine again. New colors. New plants. New air. I filled it with people who chose me. I learned that silence doesn't always mean emptiness. Sometimes it means peace. Months later, Julian called. Said it was over. Said he'd lost everything. Said he wanted to come home. I met him. I listened. I forgave him. But I didn't return. Because the woman who trusted blindly no longer lived there. Now my life is quieter. Smaller. Truer. And every morning, when light reaches the corners that once hurt the most, I remember something simple and unbreakable. The sun always rises again.